Black pilot told to wait outside by airline staff minutes. Later, she shuts the entire. The air was crisp that morning as Captain Callista Monroe arrived at JFK, her heart beating with a quiet but steady pride. She'd earned this every flight hour, every test, every sleepless night wondering if the sky would ever be hers. Today wasn't just any day. It was her first official flight as senior captain for Ether Air, one of the most respected airlines in the country. But respect, she would learn, didn't always come in equal measure. As she stepped into the crew lounge, conversations hushed. Glances flickered. She kept her shoulders straight, her uniform spotless, her presence undeniable. Then came the words that shifted everything. "Captain Monroe, please wait outside." There was no explanation, no eye contact, just dismissal dressed in protocol. Inside, another captain was handed her assignment. A man who had joined the airline 6 months after she did. A man with half her flight hours, but all the right connections. Callista stood in the hallway, coffee cooling in her hand, a familiar ache rising in her chest. It wasn't just about the flight. It was about being seen, being trusted. She thought of her father, an air mechanic, who once told her, "You'll have to fly twice as high to be seen at all." He was right, and this wasn't the first time, but it might be the last. Later that day, as she shadowed a senior pilot, she noticed something strange in the maintenance logs, a date that didn't match. A routine inspection marked complete, yet undocumented elsewhere. When she asked, the answers were vague. The flight still took off, and Callista, who had been told to wait, began to watch. She didn't know it yet, but that single moment standing alone outside a conference room would be the start of something bigger. Much bigger. Because some people, when pushed to the margins, don't disappear. They prepare. And Callista Monroe? She didn't wait outside the next time. She walked through the doors with purpose, with truth, and eventually with the power to bring an entire company to its knees. But not out of revenge, out of duty, out of the unshakable belief that every life at 30,000 feet deserves more than silence below. By the third day at Ether Air, Captain Callista Monroe had already memorized the layout of Terminal C, each hallway, each restricted corridor, each subtle pause when she entered a room. What she hadn't yet mapped out was the invisible current of resistance that followed her like turbulence. Her credentials were flawless. 20 years of flying, 8 of those in military transport jets. She'd flown through sandstorms, typhoons, and diplomatic missions that required absolute precision, but nothing prepared her for the quiet sabotage she'd face here. They didn't need to yell to make her feel unwelcome. They just smiled and moved her aside. Assigned as a shadowing observer on flights she should have captained, Callista found herself taking notes instead of commands. She watched men with less experience bark orders in cockpits that should have been hers. Their tone clipped, their glances dismissive. They called it procedure. She knew better. She endured, not because she was weak, but because she was watching. Her instincts, refined over decades, sensed something deeper than prideful egos. There was a pattern in the way her flight assignments shifted, in the subtle panic she'd see on a manager's face when she asked too many questions. Something was off, and Callista had learned to listen when silence grew too loud. It was during a red-eye to Seattle that the crack became visible. Captain Garrett Doyle, a man whose reputation for perfection was only rivaled by his disdain for unnecessary change, accidentally tuned to the wrong frequency during descent. First Officer Leo Tran Young, and quiet notice but didn't speak. Callista, seated behind them as an observer, did. Captain, I believe the correct frequency is 128.35. Doyle stiffened, checked, switched. You're right, he muttered. Good catch. But his praise was hollow, because when the flight landed, she wasn't thanked. She was reassigned. Again. Later that week, Terrence Hall, a maintenance technician with kind eyes and oil-streaked hands, approached her discreetly. I saw what happened on that flight, he said quietly, and I've seen what they're trying to do. What do you mean? They want you out, Callista, and not just you. Anyone who doesn't fall in line. She blinked. Because I'm new? No, because you're honest. His words hit harder than she expected. He handed her a printed log one she wasn't supposed to see. It showed a routine inspection skipped for Flight 227, signed off anyway. She looked at the dates. It matched the day Doyle flew. You kept this? Terrence nodded. Not everyone here has forgotten what safety is supposed to mean. Her breath slowed. Something was forming. A thread. A trail. A few days later, she met Olivia Nunez, a senior flight attendant, during a delayed flight to Denver. Over cold coffee and hushed voices, Olivia pulled up a photo on her phone. A cracked cabin pressure valve, dismissed by inspectors because grounding the plane would have canceled 3 connecting flights. Callista's pulse quickened. It's happening across the fleet, Olivia whispered, but no one wants to be the first to say it. Callista met her eyes. Then maybe someone needs to be the second. That night, Callista sat in her apartment, notes scattered across her kitchen table. Emails, photos, maintenance records. Every piece fit like jagged glass, imperfect but sharp. She called her sister Camille, a civil rights attorney in D.C. I need to talk, she said. Camille's tone sharpened immediately. Is it happening again? Worse, Callista replied. This time it's not just about me. It's about passengers who don't know they're in danger. Camille didn't hesitate. Tell me everything. What had started as an insult in a hallway, please wait outside, was unraveling into something far more sinister. Callista had stumbled upon a culture built on silence, maintained by fear, and reinforced with charm. But she wasn't here to be liked. She was here to fly. And if the cost of truth meant standing alone, then she'd stand. Because the next time she stepped into a cockpit, it wouldn't be to shadow someone else's failure. It would be to navigate through the storm head-on, hands steady, eyes open. It started with a pen mark, a single handwritten inspection date on Flight 422's maintenance logout of sync with the aircraft's digital records. Captain Callista Monroe might have missed it on any other day. But on that morning, under the dim blue glow of JFK's pre-dawn terminal lights, her focus was razor-sharp. It wasn't paranoia. It was instinct. Something wasn't right. She checked again, then again, and the numbers still didn't line up. Pre-flight delay of 20 minutes, she calmly informed dispatch over comms. Verifying maintenance alignment before departure. The silence on the other end of the line was telling. 20 minutes later, she'd confirmed it. The intake valve check had been logged without actually being completed. A violation, not just of policy, but of federal aviation law. The plane wouldn't have crashed, not that day. But the difference between routine and disaster in the air is often one overlooked checkbox. When the plane landed safely in Seattle, Callista filed a detailed report. She expected pushback. What she didn't expect was a summons. In a cold, windowless conference room, Martin Crowley, Ether Air's VP of Operations, waited with legal counsel at his side. You delayed Flight 422 last night for an unverified entry. he began, barely hiding his irritation. That delay cost us over $10,000 in scheduling penalties. Callista met his gaze calmly. That delay might have saved lives. He leaned forward. That's not your call to make. With respect, Mr. Crowley, it is. As captain, I'm legally responsible for the safety of the aircraft, and incomplete logs are a violation of FAA regulations. The air thickened. You're skating on thin ice, Monroe. She didn't flinch. Then maybe the ice need to be broken. Back in her apartment that night, Callista sat beside her laptop, her sister Camille on speakerphone. You need to escalate this, Camille urged. Now! I'm not ready to burn it all down, Callista murmured. Then what are you doing? Callista hesitated. I'm mapping the fault lines. She wasn't just chasing errors. She was uncovering a culture of concealment. And like any storm, this one had been building for years. Quiet, corrosive, invisible to those who weren't watching. But she was. In the days that followed, Callista gathered more than observations. She gathered witnesses. Terrence Hall, the seasoned mechanic who'd seen inspections bypassed under pressure. Olivia Nunes, the flight attendant with photo evidence of a damaged pressurization system cleared for takeoff. Leo Tran, the co-pilot who confessed to being silenced after reporting a technical inconsistency. Every story was a thread. Every thread led to a pattern, and the pattern was horrifying. She kept records, screenshots, testimonies, physical copies of reports that contradicted each other. She wasn't just collecting facts, she was building a case. And as she documented more, the retaliation intensified. Her ID badge was downgraded restricted access. Her flight assignments vanished. Whispers trailed her down hallways. Co-workers stopped making eye contact. She'd become radioactive. But she was ready. She had already made the two most important phone calls. One to the FAA investigator her sister Camille had connected her with, and one to investigative journalist Daniel Vega from the New York Herald. The storm broke 2 weeks later. In a press conference aired nationwide, the FAA announced a formal investigation into Ether Air, citing credible internal whistleblower reports of maintenance fraud and safety violations. The same day, the New York Herald published Daniel's exposé, Altitude of Deceit, the Hidden Danger Inside Ether Air. In it were redacted logs, falsified documents, and first-hand accounts from crew members who had stayed silent for too long. Callista didn't watch the press conference live. She was on the tarmac, watching ground crews inspect aircrafts with sudden, unfamiliar diligence. It was working. That night, Terrence sent her a message. You did it. You stopped them from pretending. That's more than most ever manage. But Callista didn't feel triumphant. She felt weightless, because she knew the real work was just beginning. Saving lives isn't always loud. Sometimes it starts quietly, with a pilot, with a pen mark, with a refusal to ignore what others conveniently forget. And when everything else is stripped away, what remains is what brought her to the skies in the first place: duty, integrity, and the will to fly true. The summons came at 2:13 p.m. sharp. Captain Callista Monroe had just finished reviewing engine logs from her last flight when a junior HR officer appeared at her temporary desk. No greeting, just a note. Executive conference room, now. She tucked the message in her pocket, smoothed her navy blazer, and stood. Every step down the polished hallway felt rehearsed, deliberate, steady. She wasn't afraid. She was ready. When the glass doors opened, Callista found herself face-to-face with Martin Crowley, VP of Operations, Garrett Doyle, the old-school chief pilot, and two unfamiliar men in gray suits, legal counsel, no doubt. Their faces were stiff and their intentions clearer than ever. No seats were offered. "Captain Monroe," Crowley began, voice tight, "we've received reports that you've been accessing restricted areas and communicating with employees about internal matters without clearance." Callista said nothing, just stood in silence, the calm in her eyes unnerving them more than outrage ever could. "And," Doyle added, "it appears you've been collecting documents, sensitive records. We have reason to believe this is part of a coordinated effort against Ether Air." She finally spoke, her voice even. "Are you accusing me of something illegal?" Crowley leaned forward. "We're giving you a chance to walk away quietly. Resign. Today. Sign a non-disclosure agreement, and we'll consider the matter closed." Callista's lips curved, not into a smile but something sharper. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a slim black folder, placing it carefully on the table. "I wouldn't do that just yet." Inside were printed summaries of maintenance violations, testimonial excerpts, and time-stamped photos. Everything she'd gathered enough to destroy reputations, maybe even lives. But what mattered more was who already had it. At 9 a.m. this morning, she said, a complete report was submitted to the FAA. The room stiffened. At noon, a second copy went to Daniel Vega at the New York Herald, and a third, she added, her gaze slicing across the table, was placed in secure cloud storage with timed release protocols. In case of, let's say, unexpected turbulence. Doyle slammed a fist down. "This is blackmail." "No," she replied, locking eyes with him. "This is accountability." For a moment, no one breathed. Then one of the lawyers whispered something to Crowley. He turned pale. "What do you want?" he asked, barely audible. Callista stepped forward. "I want every plane with falsified records grounded today. I want an independent safety audit within 48 hours. And I want written protection for every employee who spoke up." Doyle barked, "That would bankrupt this company." Callista didn't blink. "As opposed to what happens when the FAA finds out you knowingly flew unsafe aircraft. When passengers find out their lives were wagered on schedules and stock prices." The weight of her words settled like fog. The room knew she wasn't bluffing. That evening, headlines exploded across national media. "Whistleblower pilot exposes safety violations at Ether Air. FAA grounds 40% of fleet amid scandal. Senior executives under investigation. Flights were canceled. Stocks plummeted. The proud logo of Ether Air, once a symbol of reach and prestige, was now tied to recklessness and betrayal." Inside her apartment, Callista didn't celebrate. She sat with a glass of water, her phone buzzing with messages of support and outrage. One message stood out from Terrence, the mechanic who first warned her. "They tried to break you in that room, but you walked out and the building shook instead." The next day, she received an offer from Phoenix Airways, along with a handwritten note. "We don't just want you to fly for us. We want you to help us fly better." But Callista wasn't rushing into anything. Not yet. Because what they tried to do to her in that room, they had done to others. And next time, it might not be someone with her resolve. So she made a decision not just to fly again, but to rewrite the flight path for everyone behind her. Because that glass-walled conference room wasn't the end of her journey, it was the moment she took control of the skies. The wind tugged gently at her collar as Captain Callista Monroe stood near Gate 28, watching ground crew swarm a waiting aircraft like quiet bees. It had been 5 days since the report dropped. 5 days since Ether Air's secrets were scattered across headlines, FAA directives, and primetime news. 5 days since she stopped being invisible. But she hadn't come for recognition. She came because change, real, hard-earned structural change, had to be followed through. This wasn't just about the scandal. It was about what came after. Since the exposure, Martin Crowley and Garrett Doyle have been suspended, and the FAA had permanently grounded over one-third of Ether's fleet for unsanctioned maintenance practices. Public apologies were issued, but damage control couldn't repair trust. Yet amidst the wreckage, something unexpected had bloomed. People were talking. Whispers turned into messages. Silences became stories. Employees who had once feared Callista's presence were now seeking her out, offering photos, timelines, conversations long suppressed by fear of retaliation. Every message was a crack in the old system, and through it, light began to pour in. One afternoon, while organizing documents for the federal inquiry, Callista received a message from Olivia Nunes. "Meet me at Maintenance Hangar B. Come alone." When she arrived, the hangar was empty, except for Olivia, holding a sealed envelope. "It's from Flight 336, Olivia said, eyes steady. "Last year. Cracked valve. I submitted the report, and it was buried." Inside the envelope were inspection forms, a technician's handwritten warning, and a signature from a supervisor authorizing the flight anyway. Callista exhaled slowly. "How long have you been holding on to this?" "Too long," Olivia replied. "But not anymore." That night, Callista sat at her desk, papers surrounding her like a paper city. Her laptop blinked to life. Camille, her sister and legal counsel, appeared via video call. "We have more than enough now," Camille said. "The Justice Department's ready to file charges. They're asking if you'd be willing to testify in front of Congress." Callista paused. The idea of speaking publicly didn't frighten her, but the weight of what she represented did. She wasn't just a pilot anymore. She had become the face of something bigger, a reckoning in an industry that had kept its doors locked to people like her for decades. Still, she nodded. "I'll do it." Weeks later, standing before the Congressional Transportation Committee, Callista adjusted the microphone, heart calm but unshaken. She spoke clearly, slowly, her voice resonating through the chamber. "Flying isn't just physics and protocol, it's trust. Passengers trust us to speak when something's wrong. And when a system punishes those who speak, it punishes everyone who boards that plane." Her words were met with silence, a silence filled not with doubt, but with understanding. By the time the hearing ended, headlines read, "Pilot's Testimony Sparks New Whistleblower Protections in Aviation." FAA mandates independent safety audits industry-wide. Callista Monroe, the captain who wouldn't stay silent. And just like that, the door that had once been shut in her face opened wide, but she didn't walk through it alone. Terrence Hall was named head of maintenance quality control at Phoenix Airways. Olivia Nunes was promoted to director of cabin safety, where her voice could no longer be buried. Leo Tran, once silenced, now led a peer support program for junior pilots navigating industry politics. And Callista, she accepted a new position, president of operational safety at Phoenix Airways. But she didn't hang up her wings. Not yet, because the cockpit, for her, wasn't just a seat, it was a symbol. On her first day back in uniform, she met her new co-pilot, Serena Blake, a 29-year-old black woman with nerves hidden behind steady hands. "First time flying with you," Serena said, eyes wide with admiration. Callista smiled. "First of many." As they lifted into the clouds, Serena turned and whispered, "I almost gave up on flying last year, but then I read about you. You changed everything." Callista looked ahead, voice soft but firm. "The sky was never closed to us, Serena. They just tried to convince us we didn't belong in it. They soared forward together through blue horizons, not given, but earned. It was a Tuesday when Captain Callista Monroe received the letter that changed everything again, not from a reporter, not from the FAA, but from someone she thought she'd never hear from. Garrett Doyle, the man who once told her she didn't belong in his cockpit, the man who'd tried to erase her with silence. The envelope was plain, no return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper, handwritten in blocky, careful strokes. Captain Monroe, during my time assigned to community service, I've had a lot of hours to think. I read everything that came out, the reports, the lawsuits, the testimonies, and I realized something. I didn't just ignore the truth. I helped bury it. Nothing can undo what happened. But I want you to know what you did mattered. It made me see what I refused to look at my whole career. I'm sorry. Garrett Doyle Callista didn't cry, but she did sit quietly for a long while, the letter resting in her hand like a fragile relic of a world cracking open. 3 months had passed since the collapse of Ether Air. The company's logo had been stripped from terminals and uniforms alike. Their remaining assets were absorbed by Phoenix Airways, a rising carrier known more for ambition than legacy. Yet what rose from the ashes wasn't just a rebrand, it was a transformation. And Callista was at the center of it. Her days were now spent between cockpits and boardrooms. As president of operational safety, she walked the same halls where pilots once whispered behind her back, now to find her for guidance. Her impact echoed louder than she ever imagined. Not because she exposed a failing system, but because she helped rebuild one that could finally work for everyone. Phoenix implemented blind application reviews. They launched mandatory whistleblower training. And they invited diverse voices to shape future policies, not as tokens, but as architects. Still, she hadn't forgotten the cockpit. Every few weeks, Callista would sign up for a flight to remind herself why it all began. On one such day, she flew alongside Junior First Officer Tasha Greer, a 26-year-old woman with quiet nerves and wide, determined eyes. As they leveled off above 30,000 feet, Tasha turned and said, "Captain, I read about you. I almost quit my program. But then I saw what you did." Callista smiled. "I almost quit too," she replied, "but the sky was never theirs to keep." That night, back at her apartment, she took out Garrett's letter again. This time she wrote a reply. "Captain Doyle, the truth is we all carry weight. Yours, mine, this industry's. What matters is what we do with it. I accept your apology, but more than that, I hope you do something with the understanding you've gained. Because change doesn't end with recognition. It begins there. The sky belongs to those who fly it with integrity." Captain Monroe. She folded the letter and placed it near the window, where the evening light turned the paper gold. Tomorrow another flight would rise into the air, one safer, more just, because she refused to accept wait outside as her place. Because silence may protect the powerful, but only truth clears the sky. The 5th anniversary of Ether Air's collapse arrived not with headlines, but with a quiet morning sky. Captain Callista Monroe sipped her coffee by the window of her modest office at Phoenix Airways. Outside, planes moved with silent grace across the tarmac, their wings slicing through dawn's golden mist like signatures of purpose. She hadn't meant to remember. But memory has its own gravity. That morning, her inbox held an unexpected message. The sender, Garrett Doyle. For a moment she hesitated. They hadn't spoken since her measured, cautious letter of reply 2 years ago. The subject line read only, "A reflection." She opened it. Inside was an attachment, a transcript of a speech Doyle had given at a regional aviation safety conference. She skimmed the first few lines, expecting something hollow, but what she found surprised her. And I owe my understanding to a woman I once tried to sideline. She didn't just change my perspective, she redefined my profession. Callista closed her laptop, heart still. Forgiveness, she had learned, isn't always about healing the past. Sometimes it's about freeing the future. Later that day, she stepped into a training simulator where Serena Blake, a young black pilot in training, was finishing a complex landing sequence. Callista watched quietly. The girl's hands were steady, her voice clear, her decisions sharp. Serena turned as the test ended, breathless but glowing. "Captain Monroe, I didn't know you were watching." Callista smiled, stepping forward. "I always watch the ones who remind me why I stayed." The industry had changed. Not perfectly, not all at once, but enough. Thanks to whistleblower protections she'd helped shape, pilots now had real channels for reporting safety concerns without fear. Thanks to blind hiring initiatives, a new wave of diverse aviators entered flight school each year. And thanks to one woman's refusal to wait outside, truth had become part of the checklist, not an exception, but a standard. That evening, Callista visited the newly unveiled National Aviation Integrity Exhibit, a small, elegant space inside the FAA's DC headquarters. Among the framed photos and archived documents was a simple plaque beneath her old badge and uniform. Captain Callista Monroe, the pilot who wouldn't stay silent. The sky isn't just a place we fly through. It's a place we must protect for everyone. Her eyes lingered not on the tribute, but on the group of cadets gathered in front of it. One girl pointed at the plaque, whispering to a friend. Callista turned and quietly exited the hall. Some legacies speak loudest when you're no longer trying to be heard. Back on the tarmac, a voice buzzed in her headset. "Captain Monroe, Flight 217 to Seattle. Ready when you are." She smiled. "Let's fly." As she climbed into the cockpit, the sun kissed the edge of the horizon. Not an ending. Not even a new beginning. Just a continuation of everything she had carried, of everyone who came next, of a sky that never really closed, only waited to be reclaimed. Captain Callista Monroe no longer flinched when people said her name in meetings. They said it with respect now, sometimes with hesitation, always with weight. It had been 2 years since the collapse of Ether Air, since she walked into that glass-walled boardroom, not as a disgraced pilot, but as a force that would crack open a system built to keep people like her outside. What followed wasn't a headline. It was a ripple. Airlines across the country, once dismissive of diversity initiatives, quietly began to rewrite policies. The FAA, once slow to respond, launched an independent whistleblower division, modeled after recommendations Callista helped draft. Flight schools implemented blind evaluations. Maintenance logs required biometric verification. And most importantly, pilots were finally encouraged to speak, not silenced for trying. Callista now split her time between Phoenix Airways, where she served as president of operational safety, and industry panels where she trained aviation leaders on ethical flight culture. But once a month, she still returned to the skies, still strapped in, still flew, because the sky had always been more than a destination. It was a place where truth couldn't hide. On one of those flights, a passenger stopped her during boarding. "You're the woman from the hearings, right? The one who exposed everything?" Callista nodded politely. The woman smiled, tears forming. "My son's a pilot now. Said he could finally apply without changing his name." That, more than applause or articles, was the moment that stayed with her. Because Callista never set out to be famous. She set out to fly with integrity, and when that was denied, she chose something harder, to tear down what needed breaking and rebuild what others would need to stand on. Not everyone understood her journey, but every time she looked out over a cockpit window with a young co-pilot at her side, someone who looked like her, or didn't, she understood it perfectly. The sky, after all, had no gatekeepers. Only those brave enough to fly toward its furthest horizon. And she was never afraid of altitude. Sometimes the most powerful change doesn't begin with a speech or a spotlight. It begins in silence. It begins with someone being told to wait outside, to stay in their place, to keep their head down. But then comes a choice, to accept that silence or to challenge it. Callista Monroe didn't fight with noise. She fought with truth, with records, with patterns, with patience. And when the system pushed her to break, she chose to bend it instead. She never sought to destroy a company. She sought to protect lives. And in doing so, she ended up rewriting how the entire industry listens to its crew, to its conscience, to its truth. This story is not just about one woman. It's about everyone who's been underestimated, silenced, or dismissed, but kept going anyway. It's a reminder that the sky doesn't belong to power. It belongs to those who earn the right to rise. So if you've ever been told to wait outside, remember this. Sometimes the door closes because you were meant to build a better one. And when you do, don't just walk through it, fly.